If you ever wanted a game where the moon is pretty much Earth, that is ruled by a moon queen, and is upset by a living teddy bear that has no friends, then this is the game for you. What is that game exactly? Well, it would be 2013's Puppeteer, released exclusively for the PS3. Now, me saying that, do you want to guess who developed this game? No. Nah. No. Yep. I don't know why Japan's studio wanted to make this, but it is a 2D platformer, so I'm here for it. That one sentence overview about bears and queens might have seemed like an acid trip, but no, that's pretty much the gist of it, although there is plenty more to go over. The story is quite something, so buckle up. So, the little bear was once a subordinate of this queen, when he was persuaded by this random flying cat, Yin Yang, to touch the queen's moonstone, which is the stone that keeps the balance of light and dark on the moon. Touching the dark side, he gains its power, and believes that the queen's affection towards him is a lie. So he and his 12 animal friends steal Calibris, a pair of magical scissors that I swear every time someone says its name, I think they're saying Cadicrus. They rush out of the castle and vow to build their own kingdom, which eventually happens. This leads to the usurpation of the entire kingdom, which happens all off screen, of course. The little bear, now going by the Moon Bear King, breaks the light side of the moonstone and gives the 12 pieces to his 12 animal friends, which turns all of them into these massive beasts. And now the bear at night sucks the souls of the sleeping children from Earth and puts them into puppets to be used as slaves. Ooh, isn't this kind of dark for a kid's game? That's where the hero of this story comes in, Kutaro. Okay, quick question, is it Kutaro or Kutaro? Because some people pronounce it one way and some the other.
Kutaro.
What was your name again?
Kutaro.
Kataro, huh? Right on. We did it, Kataro. It's back to normal.
Now that Kutaro and Calibris...
Which is it? Anyways, Kotaro is a boy from Earth who is destined to stop the Moon Bear King's rule. So he steals back Calibris and uses it to take out the generals and get the Moonstone pieces back. Along the way, saving the Sun Princess, Picarina, and meeting a wide variety of different interesting characters, all while being guided by the Moon Witch, Esma Potts. The main joke with her is that she's fat and ugly and also very, very loud. Do you think that's wacky and funny? So let's go there next. The writing and the fact that nobody shuts the fuck up. Although that isn't necessarily a bad thing in its entirety. This game had Marvel humor a whole decade before that was coined. Constant jokes or descriptions about what's going on, especially from the narrator, who always has to give his own opinion. But I guess that is the job of a narrator, isn't it? I know this sort of writing is extremely hit or miss for people. Thankfully, they know when to take things seriously and quiet down with the jokes. And even more thankfully, I'd say I like most of the writing. The majority of it is quite witty. Alright, back to the characters. Picarina is your standard rebellious princess who has a bad temper. Yin Yang the cat has the tendency for some perfect cat puns and is a wise ass that I quite like. Too bad he isn't in as much of the game as the first act would have you believe. Esma Potts, who we already discussed, is a bitch, but you probably already knew that looking at this character design, although she doesn't mind getting involved in some of the game's goofier moments. Captain Gaff, a pirate captain who's a real bro, and someone I wouldn't mind sharing a drink with, if I actually drank. All the generals bring their own sort of theatrical flair to the game, and the Moon Bear King is as big and threatening as a main head honcho needs to be, and Kutaro doesn't talk. Which is good, if the story behind why that is true. If you know, you know. That doesn't mean that he's a blank piece of wood, however. Because he's made out of wood? Do you get it? As you can usually see him fucking around in the background, while the voice characters yammer on about the plot. He's really more of a vessel for us, as the players, to experience this handcrafted world. That's actually a pretty good segue into the next section, the presentation. My god, I don't think I can imagine how much time and work had to go into making this game feel as alive as it does. Folks, do I even have to explain? You have been looking at the footage, haven't you? It's always throwing out all sorts of different aesthetics. Turns out the moon has quite the array of locales, from tall castles, rich forests, swamps, a desert, to snowy mountains, outer space, and even a missing set from The Nightmare Before Christmas. If the Tim Burton influence wasn't somehow apparent enough, then it's on full display here. Everything is being held up by strings. How all the pieces of the landscape and the level design all slide into place whenever you transition between scenes. It has a style that goes all out and it never skimps on, and it does wonders in immersing you in this large world they've created, even going as far as adding audience noise like cheering and gasp that you can thankfully turn off. I didn't, but it's a nice option to have. Not to mention the soundtrack, which also feeds into this. Now, I'm not a music tactician, but I'm just gonna say it. The music is pretty good. I mean, what do you expect from the guy who composed the music for the motherfucking Emoji Movie? That's not a joke, by the way. The presentation and the story really does make for one unforgettable experience. Going back to the story for a second, I'd say my biggest complaint is the fact that the majority of the backstory for these characters are regulated to these optional storybooks, which are indeed charming, but the charm isn't enough to make them not feel like pace breakers. If you ignore these, you'd still be able to get the baseline of what's going on, but the why and the what, when it comes to character motivation, could be lost on you. Unfortunately, the gameplay doesn't leave as much to the imagination. This is a pretty simple platformer when it comes down to it, but one with so much heart that it sort of overrides the simplicity. One that I hope your thumb is ready for, as one form of gameplay that this game subscribes to is button mashing. With Caddicarus, you need to do exactly what you expect with a pair of scissors, cutting through hordes of gimps, yes, that's what they're called, I'm being serious, and saving the souls of children. And you can also fly. You cut through the background elements, which keep you up in the air for as long as you have things to cut through. For the most part, it feels good to do this, although it does have some hitches. For one, it doesn't feel like you have a complete 360 range of cutting movement. So if you have to go in a line that's a weird angle, you're going to have to go up and right, up, right, till you reach your destination. So it doesn't feel as smooth as it could be. Then Kotaro's jump arch, which is not the stuff of platforming kings either. He's not as nimble as a Mario or a Sonic, so it's good that you're going to be spending most of your time on these string sections where you mash square, mash square, mash square, and mash square to cut along the line until you reach the end of it, while occasionally choosing the correct direction to go and jumping over obstacles. Some stages are nothing but this, and lucky the presentation helps distract you from the fact that you're just mashing square all the time, or maybe you ride on the back of something. Still, ends up being the same in the end, and you're also followed around by a companion who is usually Pecorina, and controlled by the right stick. You move them around the environment and can press R2 to interact with objects. Most of the time it just spits out moon shards, but sometimes they can be heads and other beneficial things. The game adds variety by giving you a bunch of different warrior heads that give Kotaro special abilities, like being able to throw bombs or doing a ground slam. What they do add is more things to do during stages. How about you push or pull these objects around to clear a path, or pull on hooks with your grappling chain. Each of these are then integrated into the level designs and puzzles. Easily the best upgrade is the scissors one, where if you time your button presses when the fire shows up, you go much further and can kill enemies in one snip. This is much more like it when you think about upgrades. It's multi-purpose compared to the others, which usually serve their one or two different purposes that never truly evolve past that initial tutorial. You may have also noticed the different heads that Kotaro has been wearing. Each of these has their very own special action that they can do, but they only ever serve as keys for specific things. Whenever you see the bat signal, then you know you need a specific head. There's a few things you get. Maybe it's a wheel that could give you some heads, moonstone shards that could give you an extra life, or maybe some enemies because fuck you. Or they can open up bonus stages, which are unique depending on the stage. Or even in certain boss fights, you can completely skip entire phases of the fight if you have the right head. Now that's a reward for keeping your head. Yeah, it's pretty easy to lose them as they serve as your health bar. The max you can hold is 3, and if you get hit, your current head gets knocked off, which if you're quick enough you can get it back. But if it's rolling down a hill, you can kiss that head goodbye, because you are not going to be able to move fast enough to get it back. It is kind of funny in a fucked up sort of way though, watching it roll down a hill as you chase after it. And about those boss fights, they are by far the most bombastic part of the game. They normally play out in one of two different ways. Big wide shots or circling around the boss while they're in the middle. Despite this reuse of framing, the bosses do feel unique from each other, thanks to the power-ups you get as you proceed. They just add more and more onto the boss fights in terms of their patterns, keeps it fresh as the game moves along. Although they do use this Weaver Carpet boss way too much. Just because you give him different hats doesn't change the fact that it's just the same boss again. Yes, even if you make one of them the Grim Reaper. This fight is pretty different though, I guess it gets a pass. With all the cutting you're doing during these boss fights, it's all sorts of visceral. This is just an aspect of the game that gets brushed aside because these are just cute little puppets, but there's a lot of murder in this game. I mean, the generals don't stand a chance against Kotaro's scissors. All of them take after different animals, and while they might all seem big and imposing, they all go down spectacularly. The game really goes all out on the brutality of these kills, that if this were realistic, instant AO rating. Kotaro is a menace to society. I acknowledge that the majority of the gameplay section sounded a bit complainy, so I will reinforce the fact that I enjoyed this game. It was a unique experience, and that's one aspect of games that I value a lot. There wasn't a point here where I was like, okay, screw this. Maybe this pumpkin boss, he sucked. But everything else, seal of approval. Puppeteer really is one of those games that has a lot of potential to come back and expand on its ideas. I thoroughly enjoyed myself, and I'm sad to see that this game, more than a lot of other games in the landfill that is PlayStation IPs, has pretty much been abandoned. To play this, you're going to have to track down an original copy for the PS3, and it isn't particularly cheap either, as it hasn't been re-released on PS4 or PS5. Come on, PlayStation, what are you doing? But I can say that about a lot of things they're doing now, can't I? You know what they say, you're often toughest on the things you love the most. If there was ever to be a potential sequel, which is extremely unlikely, I'm aware, it could be up there in my personal pantheon of 2D platformers. What would have to happen for that to occur though? I think for starters, the heads would need more purpose than just opening up paths to collectibles or bonus rooms. Maybe give each of them a special ability, something to make them unique. That would most likely mean that they need to reduce the amount of heads, because there are a lot of them, but that's a sacrifice I think anybody who's played this game would be willing to make. That way they could integrate these abilities into finding the secrets, instead of you just using the head in a designated spot and something random happens. Also, give Futaro a more traditional health bar, because getting hit and losing your head was never an enjoyable aspect, especially if it's a head that you need for a secret, and you can't obtain it in the level that you're in, which happens a lot. Then last but certainly not least, ditch the QTEs. I sort of enjoyed them. I get an Asora's Wrath kind of enjoyment from them, where they are so over the top that even though the gameplay is basically non-existent, it's still enjoyable, and the era of the oversaturation of QTEs has passed, so they almost felt nostalgic even. But this is by no means me asking for them to come back, god no. Just, you know, nostalgic. At the end of the day though, I would like to play with things that are going on the screen. So that's that. Of course there are other things that I could mention, like the load times that could get pretty long. Not Sonic 06 levels, but yeah. So, Puppeteer is pretty cool. Do you remember this game? Sadly, probably not.